All right, so we've had enough of training camp and preseason go down that we can talk about guys that have surprised during not mini camp, preseason, and have really disappointed throughout training camp, right? So I have a list of guys, a bunch of dudes here that I think have surprised in one way or the other. Since there's so many people to talk about, kind of just want to get into it. So we're going to start here with an early riser, Mike Woods, right? Remember Mike Woods at the beginning of camp, man? We was talking about Mike Woods and nonstop for the first 2 weeks of camp. And then he got hurt. And he ain't played since. So, temper the expectations, but he's a 6th-round pick. From what it looks like there might be something there, right? I don't know how much is there, but it seems like there's something there. Like, this isn't going to be one of those picks where we end up getting absolutely nothing out of. And for a 6th-round pick, something is the market price. So if you can get something, that's a good job there. On that same note, Mike Harley Jr. is somebody who's been turning some heads at camp, making some wild plays, has a outside chance to make the roster. He's just been a fun guy to watch during camp. I want to show him some love during this process. Other guys who are lesser known that I think have stood out in a positive way, Nakia Griffin-Stewart and Zaire Mitchell-Payton. I thought this 3rd tight end spot would be a disaster, like an absolute disaster during training camp. An absolute mess, but it's turned out that it hasn't been that much of a mess. It's actually been a fine competition that's really boiled down between these guys, these two guys, and Miller Forrestall with an outside chance of making it there. But Nakia Griffin-Stewart has had some standout moments in the preseason game. Zaire Mitchell-Payton, has had some standout moments in training camp. Both of these guys are providing enough interest to be a 3rd tight end and be okay with them being the 3rd tight end. So interesting stuff there. Other unknown guys. Let's talk about Isaac Rochelle. Well, he's not unknown. He's actually very popular on TikTok, him and his girlfriend. But Isaac Rochelle, he's a journeyman defensive end. He's had some really good tape this preseason, right? He's had a couple of good games. Well, had a good game last week and the week before. I think he put on some good tape last week. And has had a consistently good camp, good hands. Veteran player. It's hard to tell with veteran players when they're playing in the 3rd or 4th quarter of these preseason games, because a lot of them winning is them winning just because they're more advanced than the players that they're going up against, right? A lot of undrafted guys. So it's just that's what's showing up when they're playing these guys. Not necessarily something indicative of what they could do on a Sunday, but still impressive stuff from Isaac Rochelle. I think he has a chance to make this roster. Isaiah Thomas, I think, has a real chance to make this roster too. Again, just put together some impressive tape. Unfortunately, he got injured last week. He should be back for this week's preseason game. If he could put together another game like he had in the first one, he has a real good shot of making this team. I like Isaiah Thomas a lot. Good length. He's not going to be your guy opposite of Myles Garrett anytime soon. But he can be a long-term solution of what we've been trying to do with Chase Winovich and Takk McKinley, right? That 3rd heater off the bench / backup guy, right? It's been Joe Jackson and Takk McKinley last year. This year, it's probably going to be Alex Wright and Chase Winovich. But next year, once Chase is gone, and maybe if you feel like Alex Wright is ready to step up to the plate and be that number 2 option outside of Myles, then you can throw in Isaiah Thomas in there to be kind of both of those spots. So it's an interesting spot for him. Let's talk about guys a little bit more. If you're not like a hardcore, I'm going to watch every single video that comes out of training camp person. Josh Dobbs, I want to talk about. 2 great preseason games so far. We'll see what he does in this 3rd one. But even if he plays terrible in this 3rd preseason game, I could not be happier with what I've seen out of Josh Dobbs. And look, what I'm looking for out of Josh Dobbs is somebody who can be an occasional 2, but a standard 3. And he's exceeded that expectation to where I feel like he could be a standard 2 for a lot of teams. Now, he's not somebody you want to go. He's not like Jacoby Brissett, where Jacoby has a game that you kind of want to go in, that you're fine going in 11 games with. Josh Dobbs is not that, right? Josh Dobbs is finding some spot work. Josh Dobbs I think he can have some packages while Jacoby Brissett's out there. And Josh Dobbs is nice if you need a guy for a game, right? But I don't think Josh Dobbs is like, you're going to start Josh Dobbs for a chunk of the season or anything like that. But from what he's been asked and what we've seen out of him, excellent. I mean, there are a lot of people writing off Josh Dobbs when they signed Josh Rosen for some reason. I don't know why people bought into that Josh Rosen hype again. That Josh Rosen hype has been stale for 4 years. Like, everybody who's had that Josh Rosen hype has smelt it, took one sniff of it, and threw that thing out the second they could. I don't know why so many people, when the Browns signed Josh Rosen, thought it was a competition for Jacoby Brissett. For whatever reason, they bought into the hype of Josh Rosen, which is goofy. Let's talk about Jacoby Brissett. I think Jacoby Brissett has shown some nice things. I really want to see him in the preseason, though, just because what I want to see in those few drives he's going to be in, and I don't anticipate he plays even a quarter. I think he's going to play like 2 or 3 drives. I think what they had to shine in there for 2-3 drives, so they'll probably have Jacoby in there. There's so many J's in this quarterback room right now. But Jacoby in there for about 2-3 drives. And what I want to see out of Jacoby is some decisiveness, right? It's hard to be decisive when you have all that time at practice. I want to see it when the bullets start flying, when the missiles are live, right? You know, as the saying goes. Will Jacoby Brissett be decisive? Will he get rid of the ball in a reasonable amount of time? That's his big problem, right? If you can point to an issue with Jacoby Brissett, and whenever I talk to people who've watched him play for full seasons in Indy, this is what they say. Hey, he's pretty good if he gets the ball out quick, but if he starts holding on to the ball, he makes problems. And that's the thing. Jacoby can hold on to the ball too long. New offense, I kind of worry about him having some decision-making fatigue. So I really want him to be decisive and be quick with it. If that's what we see out of Jacoby for 11 games, I feel real good about the Browns' chance to get to at least 5 wins. I really do, if he's decisive. If he's not, it's going to be a struggle, right? Because he's going to take some sacks, or he's going to not really push the ball downfield or anything like that. So Jacoby, I want to see him be decisive, right? Be decisive, smart, and decisive. That's all I want to see out of him. Greg Newsome is another guy I have here as a surprise. And look, Greg Newsome was so good last year, it's hard to think that he would be a surprise in camp this year. But he has been excellent in camp. I mean, he has looked like Denzel Ward 2 out there. So Greg Newsome, I think he's taken a step in his game. And he was already a really good corner last year. If he is taking a step, and if I'm right in that, then boy, this secondary is going to be really good. It will be hard for them not to, barring good health, right? Jerome Ford is another guy I have here. Now, I've always been a fan of Jerome Ford. I was a fan of the pick when they made it, even though it would give him like 72 running backs on this roster. I like Jerome Ford's ability to catch out the backfield and his quickness. He's just a really good athletic guy. I've always pointed out, you know, people point to Desmond Ridder whenever they talk about Cincinnati being a playoff team. And I'm talking about Cincinnati, the football team, the college football team, not the pro football team, right? Whenever you talk about Cincinnati being the first non-Power 5 school to make the playoff, everybody points to, Desmond Ridder led. We do this quarterback thing, right? Desmond Ridder led that team to that. When it was really guys like Sauce Gardner on the defense, Myjai Sanders on the defense, and then you look on the offensive side of the ball, and the best player on that offense was by a mile, Jerome Ford. It wasn't even close as far as effectiveness goes last year. I mean, you watch that Cincinnati-Houston game, Jerome Ford took over. Any game where they needed it, Jerome Ford was there for the Bearcats. So I've always thought he was a good player that was kind of getting underlooked because everybody was so focused on the quarterback at Cincinnati, so focused on Desmond Ridder that they kind of looked over Jerome Ford. But I think Jerome Ford has a lot of potential here, and it's really flashed in camp. Another group that I want to mention, because there's so many names, I can't really mention it, but this offensive line depth, Michael Dunn, Blake Hance. I mean, even Drew Forbes has put in some good time here. Just a lot of depth here in this offensive line. They've really outdone themselves. That second unit looked like a first-team unit versus Philly. And I know I've heard some reports about like Philly beat reporters saying that the Browns didn't look good. What the Browns are good at, it's hard to demonstrate in a training camp practice, right? Because where are the Browns strong at? They're strong at running the ball offensively, and they're strong at offensive line, right? These aren't things you're going to demonstrate in a joint practice or even in a practice that are going to be easily observable. Same thing with like Myles Garrett and how good he is, right? Even when you talk about the secondary being really good, it's hard to demonstrate that during a training camp practice because you're playing 7-on-7 with no pass rush most of the time. And yeah, of course somebody's going to get open. If you have 4 or 5 seconds to get open, that's just the law of football. But, it's just one of those things where, how this team looks in the circumstances that they have to practice in the training camp might look completely different than how they do in a game. So, people panicking about that, I would give you that information at the very least, right? But that's the positive side. Now, there's been some surprises in the negative direction, and I don't really want to go here, but we have to, right? We have to cover the good and the bad of this team. But first, we're going to talk about Anthony Schwartz. And look, it hasn't been all bad with Anthony Schwartz. There have been some good plays. And with everybody on this list, there has been some good. But it hasn't been enough good to justify what the expectations could have been for him. And where I think Anthony Schwartz is disappointing is not necessarily me or your expectations at home, but maybe the expectations of the coaching staff, because the coaching staff has had more confidence in Anthony Schwartz as a developmental project than the fan base has ever had. And Anthony Schwartz just hasn't been delivering on that from their standpoint. I can't think, right? The drops have become an issue. The routes have never been great. He isn't good going vertical. I mean, he isn't great going horizontal. He's not necessarily super fast going vertical, right? Like, there's just been a number of issues with him. And look, do I think in a vacuum, could you make Anthony Schwartz a really good football player? Yeah, I do. Do I think the Browns have enough time to incubate that situation in order for him to become that? I just don't know. Right? There's a lot of work there. And I think he's too much work for what the Browns have available to him. And he requires too many reps to get good that are going to be suboptimal, that they can't just throw him out there to get those reps, to get better and sacrifice that. The margin of error on offense is just not that big. So this is just not going to be, I don't predict this to be the opportunity that Anthony Schwartz can develop to his full potential. I just don't see the room being there. I just don't see the opportunity being there. And most importantly, I just don't think the Browns have the time to do it. Maybe another team, or maybe he goes to a developmental league for a little while and then, comes back with a vengeance at age 27 or something like that. But I think this is going to take some time and years with him. And I just don't think the Browns have it. That's my concern with Anthony Schwartz. I don't want to say I'm out on his ability to be a good football player, right? Because I don't want to be overly negative on a young player who has a nice set of athletic tools. But what I will say is he is so raw in some areas that you need to be a wide receiver that I just don't know if you have the time to get him there. But that's Anthony Schwartz. Perion Winfrey, it hurts my soul to put this man on this side of this list, right? I wanted nothing more than Perion Winfrey to have a breakout. But I think one thing we have to remember, right, and this is going to go with Kate York too. Kate York, Perion Winfrey, two rookies that have a large fan base, right, because of how they carry themselves on social media, because of how people like me got behind them on social media. I'm not Kate York guy, but you know who Kate York people are on the internet. Like, there are people who are behind these rookies more so than others. And I want to just do this so we don't do this to these players, because I think both Kate York and Perion Winfrey, and Kate York's not a disappointment. I'm not putting him on this list, but I'm just pointing him out because he has the same phenomenon as Perion Winfrey, except for Kate York's had a good camp. Perion hasn't. But Kate York and Perion Winfrey both, have a lot of expectations riding on them for guys who are 4th round picks, right? And I think it's important for us to remember that these are developmental players who have a ton of talent, but it's not going to be all there in year one, right? I don't expect Kate York to be anything close to Justin Tucker in year one, or even Chris Boswell, right? And even with the kicker out in Cincinnati, a lot of that didn't show up till the playoffs with him, right? He was a pretty average kicker up until that point. So with Kate York and Perion Winfrey, I think it's a good opportunity for us to temper down these expectations for year one, right? Maybe Kate York is one of the greatest kickers of all time, day one, but we don't need to expect that, right? We don't need to sit there and expect this man to attempt 66, 63, or 62 and a half yard field goals in order to justify that 4th round pick, right? The talent is there. The potential is there. We need to wait on that potential, right? Perion Winfrey, right? He might be able to produce year one. That was my hope. It's looking like he might be a guy that you have to develop a little bit, right? There's some things that have popped up that have become consistent issues with him. Pad height. He's always too high. Ball get off. Has a problem timing it for whatever reason, right? The traits are still there. He has showed flashes, which is still makes me confident in his ability to develop. I think he probably needs to get a little stronger. I think he probably needs to get in better shape, cardio-wise. Like, not saying he's out of shape, but just so he could take more snaps and take more punishment. And I think he just needs to be developed. The raw tools are there. The length is there. The body, all that stuff's there. We just need to grow that a little bit, right? And I don't think there's so much work there that it's going to be a extra long project like an Anthony Schwartz is to me. So just patience there. Same thing with another guy that I'm going to put in the disappointment category because he's been injured most camp. David Bell, right? Had a good preseason game last week, but all in all, it hasn't been the David Bell show that we've wanted it to be, right? We've talked about Mike Woods and Mike Harley more than we talked about David Bell during training camp, and that's not what we expected going into this. So David Bell, again, these rookies, I think Martin Emerson, Perrion Winfrey, Cade York, David Bell, look, these four have potential to be starters for this team for a very long time. But we have to remember they're late-round picks, and this is where the Browns are, right, for the next couple of years where they're not going to have first-round picks. So the guys that we're going to get excited about in this draft are going to be late-round guys, second at the best, third, fourth, fifth. The part of the Browns, where the Browns are in their development as a franchise is not where they used to be, right? There was a time 5 years ago where a third-round pick was expected to start and contribute. That is not the world that we live in today. Not only are the Browns picking later in the draft, they're picking later in the rounds, they have less draft picks, but also those draft picks are not going to be expected to contribute day one, unless they're like a Cade York where they're the only kicker on the roster, right? But most of these guys are not going to be expected to contribute day one. That's the plan. That's what happens in Pittsburgh. That's what happens in Baltimore, Cincinnati, all the teams that have complete rosters. It takes a while for these guys to get acclimated. And I need us to not think that somebody's a bust just because they don't have 500 or something. Like they don't bust out in year one, because that's just not where the Browns are as long as Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski are still head of this program, because this program's at a different place. It's not where it needs to be, but it's definitely better than what it used to be. And that is at a point to where they're developing players. So Perrion Winfrey, hey, maybe the impact's not great in year one, but year 2 and 3, might be there. I'm looking at Jordan Elliott as somebody I should have put on the surprise list, because I think he's going to be not really. I think he's going to be good this year. I have gotten off my reserve on Jordan Elliott, where I thought he was on the way of getting cut. From what I've seen in camp, he looks good. He looks like he's found it. So again, just because these young guys are in there does not mean that I think that their careers are over or that they're going to be bad or something like that, or there's reason to panic. It's just, hey, we had these expectations for these players. They're not living up to them right now, but these things take time. Player development is a process. But those are my camp surprises. Let me know your camp surprises down in the comment section below. Y'all have a great day. Have a good night.